When Pam Bondi smirked and called Jasmine Crockett unqualified on national TV, she didn't just insult a congresswoman, she challenged a legacy in the making. She thought she was playing politics. She had no idea she had just triggered a reckoning. Pam Bondi thought it would be just another panel, another stage, another spotlight, another opportunity to deliver the kind of smooth, calculated commentary that had made her a fixture in conservative circles. The Lincoln Theater buzzed with anticipation as the audience filed in, unaware that what they were about to witness wasn't just a debate, it was a reckoning. She adjusted her blazer, smiled into the cameras, and took her seat with the confidence of someone who'd never truly been challenged. But 2 seats down sat Jasmine Crockett, and unlike the other panelists, she hadn't come to play by the old rules. The moderator's voice cut through the air, polished and professional. Let's start with the topic of federal oversight. Should Congress have more authority when states appear to be failing their citizens? It was a softball. Pam leaned in, speaking with her usual poise. Federal oversight has its place, she said. But we need experienced voices in this conversation, not performative outrage. Her eyes didn't flicker, but her words did. They sliced sideways toward Crockett like a blade wrapped in velvet. Then came the blow she thought would go unnoticed. Frankly, Bondi said, with the faintest smirk, I don't think you're qualified to speak on this. Time didn't just slow. It fractured. No gasps, no boos, just silence. Dense and waiting. The kind of silence that signals a storm is about to break. Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She let the silence grow, let it stretch, long enough to make even the cameras lean forward. Then she calmly leaned into her mic and said, I'm sorry. What exactly do you think makes me unqualified? The crowd stirred. Bondi hesitated, barely, but Crockett had already sensed the shift. It wasn't just a challenge, it was an opening. Bondi began to list her credentials: former attorney general, decades of legal experience, national exposure. Her voice was smooth, but her rhythm faltered under Crockett's gaze. And then, with the precision of a scalpel, Crockett delivered her response. I've tried over 100 criminal cases as a public defender. I've written legislation and passed it. But if your definition of qualified means looking, thinking, and operating exactly like you, maybe that's exactly why we're still here, having this conversation. There was no applause. Not yet. Just the low, charged hum of a room that had realized the rules had changed. Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to win a debate. She was here to burn down the playbook. The air didn't just tense, it shifted. It was as if everyone in the room collectively recognized that the moment had cracked open something larger than a personal jab. Crockett hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her words carried the kind of weight that didn't require volume, just truth sharpened to a blade. Pam Bondi tried to recover, forcing a polite smile, flipping through her mental Rolodex for a clever pivot. But Jasmine had already leaned back, her calm unshaken as if to say, take your time, I'll wait. And the audience could feel it. Crockett wasn't playing defense. She was preparing her second strike, then she leaned forward again, still composed, still surgical. You mentioned experience, she said, her tone laced with clarity, not venom. So let's talk about it. She reached down and pulled out a simple manila folder, one of those unassuming office supplies that suddenly felt like a ticking bomb. She flipped it open with deliberate care. When you served as Florida's Attorney General, your office blocked clemency petitions for nonviolent offenders. Hundreds of them. You were given the chance to make a real difference, and instead, you made sure those people stayed locked away. The room shifted again. A low sound began to stir. Not applause, not gasps, but something heavier. Realization. Crockett continued. You also accepted a $25,000 donation from Donald Trump's charity, days before dropping the Trump University fraud case. That's public record. That's your experience too, isn't it? Bondi sat frozen. Her jaw didn't drop, but her eyes gave it away. This wasn't a debate. It was an autopsy, and she was the subject on the table. And just last month, Crockett added, holding up her phone, you misrepresented violent crime statistics on national television to justify discriminatory policy. I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm here because women like me don't get to coast on connections or old headlines. We show our work, every time. The silence was no longer anticipation. It was respect, weighty and real. And then Crockett turned, not to Bondi, but to the audience. Her voice softened, but the message struck even harder. I've spent nights on the phone with mothers who couldn't afford a lawyer, who were told their child didn't matter. I've stood in courtrooms where the law wasn't blind. It was selective. That's my experience. So if being loud about injustice makes me unqualified, maybe what you really fear is being held accountable. Bondi said nothing. The moderator tried to jump in, stammering something about returning to the question, but no one was listening anymore, because Jasmine Crockett had already redefined the entire conversation. The moderator's voice barely registered. His words landed flat, like an afterthought echoing in a room that had already moved on. The panel had technically continued, but emotionally, culturally, it had been hijacked. Jasmine Crockett had seized the floor without asking for permission, and what made it devastating was how little effort she seemed to need. Pam Bondi sat still, eyes forward, hands clasped too tightly in her lap. She wasn't just rattled, she was cornered, and everyone watching knew it. Crockett didn't gloat, she didn't grin. That would have made this a show. But it wasn't. This was about recalibration, about letting people know that when you've been underestimated your whole life, silence becomes your armor, and facts become your fire. Jasmine waited. She gave the room space to absorb the shift, as if daring anyone to pretend nothing had happened. Then she spoke again, not to Bondi, not to the moderator, but directly to the people in the shadows, the ones whose names never made it onto the stage. Let's stop pretending this is about credentials, she said, her voice steady. This is about power. Who gets to speak, who gets to be believed, and who gets to be dismissed. She scanned the audience now, her words moving like current, building force. They told me I was too angry when I fought for tenants who were being pushed out of their homes. They said I was too emotional when I cried with a mother after her son's wrongful conviction. They said I was too loud, too black, too direct, too much. But what they really meant was, I was too different to control. A young woman in the second row wiped a tear. A man beside her nodded, arms folded. There were no chants, no standing ovations. Just the weight of hundreds of people sitting up straighter. And then Crockett turned to Bondi again, not with malice, but with finality. You didn't call me unqualified because I lack experience. You called me unqualified because I don't mirror the system you were groomed to protect. There it was, the core of it. No posturing, just a truth so sharp it left no room for rebuttal. Bondi glanced at the moderator. Her eyes said what her mouth didn't. Can we move on? But it was too late. Crockett had already made it clear. This wasn't about moving on. It was about moving forward. The cameras kept rolling, but something deeper had shifted. This wasn't a panel discussion anymore. It had become a reckoning. Jasmine Crockett wasn't responding to Pam Bondi. She was speaking to every room she had ever walked into where her presence was questioned before her words were even heard. And now, finally, everyone was listening. She reached for the folder, again, flipping through the papers inside like they were sacred texts, not for drama, but for precision. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm was its own kind of force. She was speaking with the clarity of someone who had nothing left to prove. I was told to play nice, she said, to smile more, to make people comfortable. But I didn't run for Congress to make the powerful feel safe. I ran to make the unheard feel seen. Her voice was steady, low, intimate. And somehow, that made it even louder. I represent people who are told every day that their pain is too inconvenient to discuss in polite company. I come from neighborhoods where justice doesn't knock twice. So when I sit on this stage and someone tells me, I'm not qualified, I hear every voice that's ever been silenced trying to speak through mine. Pam Bondi sat motionless, the practiced confidence now drained from her face. She glanced toward the moderator again, but he looked as lost as she did. No roadmap, no rescue. Jasmine kept going. You think credentials are paper. I think they're people. I carry the names of those I've defended, the policies I've written, the communities I've walked through, not just during campaign season, but every single day. That's my resume. And guess what? It's written in calluses and court transcripts, not in country club endorsements. She paused. Not for effect, but to breathe, to let the moment breathe. And while some of us are busy managing optics, others of us are managing crises. So if you want to talk qualifications, let's start there. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. For the first time, even Bondi didn't try to interrupt. Because Jasmine hadn't just responded to an insult. She'd buried the entire premise under 6 feet of lived experience and irrefutable truth. And without raising a single decibel, she had shifted the conversation from performance to purpose. There was no applause, no dramatic music swell. Just a quiet reverence that hung over the room like a veil. The audience wasn't just watching, they were witnessing. Jasmine Crockett hadn't simply defended herself. She had reframed the entire dialogue. The insult hurled at her was now dust in the air, forgotten, irrelevant. What remained was truth, heavy and unmovable. She closed the manila folder gently, almost ceremonially, and placed it to the side. Then, folding her hands in front of her, she looked at the crowd. Not the cameras, not Bondi, but the people. Always the people. I'm not here because I fit some mold, she said quietly. I'm here because I broke it. Because I had to. The words landed like a heartbeat. Steady. Real. She spoke now with something deeper than defiance. It was clarity, and maybe a little exhaustion. The kind that comes from fighting wars most people don't even see. There's a price to being the first in the room, she continued. The first to speak differently, to look differently, to love, to fight, to lead differently. They don't just challenge your ideas, they challenge your existence. Bondi didn't move. Her earlier smirk was now a fixed expression of discomfort, the kind people wear when they're realizing the room no longer belongs to them. I've been underestimated by men in courtrooms who didn't bother to learn my name. I've been questioned by colleagues who assumed my presence was a diversity gesture. I've been dismissed in committee rooms by people who think volume equals authority. And I've endured it all, not because I'm exceptional, but because I'm prepared. Crockett paused, letting the words settle. I didn't come here to fight with Pam Bondi. I came here to remind every young woman watching this, especially the ones being told they don't belong, that you don't need permission to speak, you just need the receipts. And trust me, we've all got them. She sat back, not smug, not triumphant, just firm, as if she had said exactly what she came to say. Bondi looked down at her notes, but they no longer mattered. The moment had passed her by. Crockett had not only changed the tone, she had reclaimed the terms of engagement. And in doing so, she reminded the world that silence can be loud, composure can be defiant, and truth doesn't need a microphone. It echoes on its own. No. One dared cut to commercial. No one shuffled papers or coughed to fill the space. The stage felt frozen in a kind of sacred suspension, like everyone was waiting to see if the moment would collapse under its own weight or rise into something historic. Jasmine Crockett sat steady. She wasn't posturing. She wasn't performing. She was holding court. Not the political kind, but the kind where truth is evidence, pain is admissible, and history is finally being heard. And then, softly, she said, "You know what I've learned? That they'll question your tone when they can't challenge your facts. That they'll label you angry so they don't have to answer why you're angry. And when all else fails, they'll call you unqualified, because it's easier than admitting. You scare them." There it was. The room tightened. I don't scare them because I'm loud. I scare them because I show up with proof, with names, with policy, with the kind of experience you don't get from a resume. You get it from being the only one in the room and surviving it. She leaned forward now, eyes scanning the audience, like she was searching for someone who needed to hear the next part the most. I've sat with mothers who didn't cry until I did. I've watched boys become men in prison yards because nobody fought hard enough to stop it. I've read bills that were written to sound fair, but were designed to break people who look like me. So don't tell me I'm unqualified. I've done more with a broken system than some have done with a flawless one. Bondi's silence had turned into something heavier. She was shrinking into her own seat now. The balance of power had flipped, so completely that she didn't even try to take it back, and Jasmine wasn't done. "Maybe the real question isn't whether I'm qualified," she said. "Maybe it's why they're so desperate to pretend I'm not." That line, gentle, surgical, landed like a quiet revolution, no fanfare, just truth, dropped with the precision of a scalpel, and in that silence, where a rebuttal should have been, where an ego might have surged forward to reclaim the room, Bondi remained motionless. Because what do you say to someone who just put your entire narrative on trial, and won without shouting? The silence was no longer a pause. It was a verdict. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just delivered a takedown, she had orchestrated a dismantling. Brick by brick, assumption by assumption, she tore down a facade that had stood comfortably for too long. And she didn't do it for applause. She did it because someone had to. She shifted slightly in her seat. Her hands clasped, her voice still soft. Intimate, almost too intimate for a room this public. "They always ask me how I stay so calm," she said, her gaze fixed somewhere just past the stage lights. "The answer is, I had to learn how to breathe through fire. When your skin, your voice, your presence is politicized before you even speak, you learn early that composure is armor." She wasn't talking to Bondi anymore. She wasn't even talking to the room. She was talking to every young black girl who had ever swallowed her voice in a meeting, every underdog who'd been told to wait their turn, every fighter who never got credit for the war they'd already won just by showing up. "You know what experience looks like to me?" she asked. "It looks like walking into a courtroom with 10 times the prep because the judge already doubts you. It looks like getting laws passed without lobbyists in your corner. It looks like staying up all night returning calls no one else will take because their zip code isn't wealthy enough to matter." She took a long breath. Not for effect, but to gather weight. She was carrying more than words now. She was carrying a legacy. So if experience looks like comfort to you, maybe we're not talking about the same country. That landed. Not like a punch, but like a prophecy. Pam Bondi sat with her hands clasped tightly now, her posture too still. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They were processing, letting it marinate. Because they knew, deep down, that something had happened here. Something that couldn't be clipped into a soundbite. And Jasmine? She just sat back in her chair, finally allowing herself to exhale. Not victorious, not smug, just steady. Like someone who had held the line long enough to know that the real power isn't in proving them wrong, it's in making them listen. A woman in the back of the audience wiped her eyes. Another reached for her phone, not to tweet, but to type Jasmine's words into a notes app. Somewhere in a dorm room, a girl who had been told to pick a safer major was changing her plans. Jasmine didn't need to go viral. She'd already gone. Deeper. And Bondi? She was still there, still silent. But now, For the first time, she wasn't just out-argued, she was outlived.